Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Our guest today is Chisten Morrow Ara, a U.S. advocate for youth with disabilities and their families, divisional coordinator for Young Life Capernaum, and mother of 4. From a young age, Christen felt a connection and friendship to children with disabilities, and that passion was incorporated into her ministry and into her desire to help establish such support in Peru. She moved there for 5 full years, which included taking care of a baby, finding her husband, and calling her Peruvian community her own. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 1 of Christen's round trip story gets ready for takeoff. Welcome, everybody, to the Round Trip Stories podcast. We are so glad that you are listening today, and I am delighted to introduce my friend Chisten Morrow Ara. And we met when I first moved to Peru, even though we actually come from the same hometown. But it took us moving to Peru to finally actually get to meet each other. So, Christen, thank you so much. I've been dying to have you on the podcast, and we're just so glad you're here with us today.
I'm excited to be here.
Welcome, welcome. So as we get started, we always like to ask a few introduction questions that we kind of think of as the backstory. So tell us first a little bit about yourself and your family. So it could be your family now or your family growing up.
So I grew up in Northern California in the Bay Area. I went to Concord High School. It was a very diverse high school. And I have an older brother and a younger brother. My parents grew up in the church. And something that's interesting is when I was in elementary school, there was a little boy with a disability in 2nd grade who was rolled into the classroom and parked next to me. And Latif's parents were at the very forefront of what we would have called mainstreaming back then. And this would be 1987, I believe, 1986, 1987. And Latif's presence really marked my life, and I knew from that time that I wanted to work with people with disabilities. I remember coming home and telling my mom that someday I wanted to live in a country like Mexico, because that was the only country that I knew that bordered us and that we'd heard of missionaries coming to or from. And I wanted to work with people with disabilities in a country like that.
How old were you at that point?
I was 7.
Wow.
Yeah. So Latif's presence and the friendship we built really marked my life. He did not speak, but used a speaking device. And there was something powerful. I remember trying to explain to my mom at a really young age, because he opened the world of disability to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became friends with all the students in that class and would spend my recesses in the classroom. And so Latif opened a world to me of friendship that I remember trying to put into words. And now as an adult, I can think back and know there was something freeing about being with those kids, that I was free to be me in a different kind of way, because they didn't have a choice but to be themselves. And so that was kind of really early on. I was 7. And then throughout middle school and high school, I found ways to volunteer with kids with disabilities. My brothers played sports, and I hung out with my friends with disabilities. And really, that was probably my pastime. And then got into high school and started inviting my friends with disabilities to come to my high school youth group with me, and ended up launching a program there and a Sunday school class. But I moved to Fresno to go to Fresno State in 2001. And when I moved here, my very first class at Fresno State, I met a girl wearing a Young Life shirt. Kind of rolled my eyes and was like, oh, I know what they're about. And we became really good friends. And eventually she told me she'd been tasked with starting Young Life Capernaum, which is the ministry for students with disabilities. And she said, I really don't know what I'm doing. I know Young Life. I know kids. I don't know disability. And I said, I don't know Young Life, but I know disability. So I said, well, what if, I've worked with Johnny and Friends. I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'll help you maybe train some people. And so that was in 2001. And later that year, we launched a Young Life Capernaum club we ended up living together, launching it in our garage. And I got to go on a trip with Wheels for the World to Peru that same year. And it was the first year they were bringing wheelchairs to Peru. I had already been to Peru twice with my church before that. So it was kind of this, oh, it's the perfect combination. I love Peru. I love Spanish-speaking countries, and this heart for disabilities. So that was the trajectory I thought I was on, was Johnny and Friends, and then we started Capernaum. So I went to Peru with Wheels for the World. It was so fun, but I had also gotten involved with Young Life, and it was this interesting perspective of I started looking at all the places we were working in Peru and going, how are they reaching students with disabilities? So I was able to connect with the national director of Young Life in Peru eventually. And we laughed because he said, I sent him an epistle. He said it was a really long email of like my vision of how we could launch an outreach to students with disabilities there. And his initial response was, great, come and do it. And that's when I sent the long email of like, I really believe it should be nationally led. Here's maybe what we could do. Maybe we could come and model and then come and train and then come do alongside. So through a series of events, I moved to Peru on El Cinco de Mayo of 2008, so May 5th, 2008.
Okay.
And I think at that point in my life, my parents were probably hoping it was a couple years, but in my mind, I was moving and I couldn't imagine, my friends were all getting married. I couldn't imagine finding someone that was like going to gallivant across Latin America with me in pursuit of kids with disabilities. So that was my role. I was throughout Latin America.
How long altogether were you there?
I lived in Peru for almost to the day 5 years. So 2008, and we moved back to California in 2013.
Thanks for that background, Christen. So please tell us a story about your initial transition and adjustment in Peru.
Yeah, so I was sent to work with Young Life, living in Lima, and to help develop our Young Life Capernaum outreach to students with disabilities across Latin America. So I knew Lima would be my base, and I would travel as needed to other places. But a lot of it was come and learn and watch. And so I moved in with a couple who served on the national board, Monica and Luis, and they had just had a little girl. Their daughter was 6 months old. And a couple weeks before I came, through an interesting series of events, they ended up with another little girl whose mom had died giving birth. They didn't have a way to feed her, and somehow Monica, in the generosity of her heart, thought if I can feed one baby, maybe I can make enough milk for two. And so I got there, and she was kind of drowning. She had a 6-month-old and a 3-month-old, and was like, I think we're going to send her back with her dad and let him figure it out. And I was like, well, if you do one, I can do the other. So somehow I came to work with teens with disabilities, and here comes this white girl with a baby, a little brown baby strapped to her. And we raised babies together for the first year I was there. And I think it's interesting because I, of course, had no expectation that I would be parenting or nannying or fostering. And yet Raquel's need for me was so grounding to me and finding a place to belong and putting down roots. And I learned very quickly how to do life in Lima and how to change a diaper in the back of a taxi or on a bus as we're bouncing around, or make a bottle on the run. She came with me most places. And I was very concerned at the time for her own attachment and bonding. And I think in a really powerful way, she also, I didn't even think of that until she also offered that to me. And so Raquel and Sophia were a huge part of my first year there because it was their first year of life. And so they came with us as we went on campuses and into orphanages. They came with us on outings and events we did with students. And really, Monica and Luis taught me how to live and do life in Lima. Anything from cooking and shopping to parenting and getting around.
Wow.
You had a high learning curve or a steep learning curve. You're parenting and adjusting to a new country.
And doing ministry.
Yeah. And I was learning how to work from home. While my job was in Lima, it was also across the division of Latin America. And so I was learning how to make time to get on email. This was before Zoom days, right? To get on email and answer things or get on the phone. We had a magic jack back then.
I had a magic jack. I had a magic jack.
And everyone thought it was so cool. So I was learning how to be a stay-at-home working mom that traveled then, which is funny because that's my life now.
And how old were you at that point when you moved?
I was 28 when I moved.
Okay.
Hey, Kristen, do you how
amazing.
much did having a baby on your back or on your front or in your stroller influence the relationships that you were making on those campuses?
Of course, a baby gets smiles and interest, conversation. It was always interesting when people would ask why I had her and who she was. And my friend Monica finally just started telling everyone, oh, we're married to Peruvians. Monica's Colombian and lighter skinned. So she'd just say, oh, we're married to Peruvians. And I would laugh and just, okay, because sometimes you don't want to tell the story over and over. Her mom died. Her father couldn't afford to raise her. So it was sweet. I think even now, one of the greatest gifts to a kid with a significant disability is to be allowed to touch or hold or play with a baby, because that's rarely something they experience, especially in Peru. So when I would take a bouncing baby and set her on somebody's lap in a wheelchair, or, let them kiss her face carefully, or touch her hands and just enjoy a baby. That was really sweet. I also think as I hosted teams, she was a bridge builder. And as I built relationships with the Peruvian team that was coming around me, she was a bridge builder. And in fact, she may be part of how Christian and I started dating. So Christian lived on the same block as Monica and Luis and would often come for lunch. At that time, his house didn't have a kitchen yet. And so every day he kind of figured out what he'd eat in the market or wherever. But the big meal in Peru is lunch. So we would make a full meal every day for lunch. And we'd usually hear outside the door, I can still hear like the sound of his footsteps, and the doorbell would ring. And we'd laugh and look at each other and go, we already have a place set for him. So Christian was around, and then he would see me coming and going from all these places. And at that point, the first year I lived there, I didn't have a car, and I rode buses everywhere. I really wanted to live like a Peruvian lived and not just pick up privilege quickly of a car. So Christian would look at me and go, you're going to walk out to Avenida Peru and get on a bus with the baby? Hang on, I'll embarcarte. I'll get you on the bus. So he'd walk out with me and make sure, the bus stopped long enough for me to step on with the baby in the front pack and the diaper bag
didn't take
and
off
whatever
while
else.
you were still halfway
Yeah.
in the door.
Yeah, or to get in a taxi if I was going in a taxi somewhere. So that was really where our friendship developed. And he just really loved Raquel alongside me.
Well, what was hard about your transition?
In some ways, I think everything was hard in transition. And yet I also look back and think it also felt so smooth. I think maybe part of the hard of saying goodbye, saying goodbye to family and friends. We didn't have in 2008 the kinds of technology we have now to stay in touch. And so it took a lot of intentionality to pick up the magic jack and call somebody. I couldn't just text them to see if they were ready to chat. I think it was probably hard for some in my family or in my community to understand why I needed to go to Peru when I had an incredible, purposeful ministry and life here in Fresno. I think learning how to manage motherhood and a baby was hard, though Monica and I did it very much together. And she often would stay. Sometimes we went with both the girls, but often she'd stay at home when I had a meeting and have the baby. So I think learning when you go to the grocery store, what do you buy to make the thing you want to make, and what's similar and what's not.
Yeah.
And different brands and qualities. So I think in a lot of ways that was hard, but I also look back and think the transition was God's provision for a smooth transition into a family and into a community and into when you move alone as a single person and you don't have a lot of, you don't have someone to hug you, you don't have physical affection, you don't have closeness. And here I had a baby who was all over me all the time. And so I think it was pretty seamless.
Yeah. it's not something you're gonna prescribe to somebody, "Hey, if you're
Mm-mm.
moving, go
Go
find a
get a baby.
baby." Like,
Go get an abandoned baby.
right. And yet, yeah, the blessings and the good things that came out of that are sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think probably what was maybe the greater transition came almost a year later when Raquel was possibly going to be adopted by some friends here in the States. They were pursuing her. And the process is, of course, complex. And about a year after we had her, she would go home and visit once in a while on weekends. Her dad decided that he wasn't going to give her an adoption, and he brought her home, and that night brought her to an orphanage near their home. And I think that's probably the hardest thing
Oh,
I had experienced for sure in Peru.
Yeah.
I remember where I was interpreting with a team. And when Monica called me and told me that he'd come to get her, I said, "Great, how did it go?" And she gave me that news. I
Oh,
remember I literally fell to the ground, and I
I
was sick, and
bet.
Christian remembers getting me home, on a bus that night. I don't remember. I was a couple hours outside of Lima, and so, it was about a week later when Monica and I were able to go visit her in the orphanage. So she'd been there a week, and she'd gone from a really connected, on target developmental baby to very withdrawn. She had bite marks all over her, and she was just like empty. Like you look into her face and eyes, it was empty. And she was in a room as we waited for them to bring her out. There's just babies like crawling all over each other, reaching for both of us, saying "Mama, Mama, Mama," and which was overwhelming. And then I see them bring her out. I think they tried to spruce her up a little. And so we had this visit with her. We both were heartbroken. And I remember saying to her, we were looking at the time, and I said, "Okay, let me wait until she's asleep." She was almost asleep in my arms. I had her, and I said, "Let me wait till she's asleep to set her down." And she woke up wailing and holding on. And I was like, "Oh, she knows. She knows that we're about to leave." She'd stopped walking. So I was a little crazy, like a mom might be.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
the next day, Christian helped me get out to where her dad lived, and I had a conversation with him. And I said, "Why did you do this? Why did you?
Yeah.
She's been so healthy." And he said, "I don't think my wife would ever forgive me for giving her away in adoption." And I said, "No, I don't think your wife would ever forgive you for abandoning her in an orphanage with 100 babies." And I
Yeah.
said, "Here's the deal. You have 24 hours to take her out, or I'm going to turn into a crazy woman that kidnaps the baby, and I'll live on the run if I need to. She's not staying there." And he's a humble man who's had a hard life, and he's just kind of defeated. And I said, "I mean it. I'm crazy. I love her with everything in me." And so he did it. He brought her home.
Hmm.
And so, um, several months later, oh, maybe several weeks later, he called, and he apologized, and he said, "I just want you to know she's as much yours as she is mine. So anytime you want her, I will get her down to you in Lima." And so that's how we did it for many years. For the years that followed that I lived there, wherever I lived, she would come spend weekends here and there with me. So
Mm.
Raquel is 17 now. She'll be 18 in January. She's turned 17. And we were in Peru last month, and whenever we go to visit, she comes to spend time with us as much as she's able. But she's graduated from high school, and she's doing something called academia and preparing for university. And so over the years that we've been back 10 times as a family. So over the years, our children have known her and loved her, and she's held them and bounced them and slept with them and snuggled them.
Mm.
And
She's a
so
big
it's kind of a
sister.
full circle.
Yeah.
In fact, Abigail, when she was only like 3 years old, it
which
was
is
really interesting.
your oldest daughter,
Yes,
Mhm.
yes,
Abigail?
yes.
Okay.
So Abigail told me, "Mom, she's my sister." And I thought, "Oh, you have no idea how she kind of is. She was my first baby." So
Yeah.
yeah, so Raquel has continued with her dad, and there's all kinds of challenges attached to a life in poverty and without a mother, but she's with her family, and we
Yeah.
still have a relationship with her. And
Uh,
she's a teenager right now, so she's in a little different space
sure.
than maybe when she was little, but we got to be with her. So that was she was a big part of my attaching, arriving, learning
Yeah.
culture and how to do life in Peru.
Yeah, and she continues to be part of your life. I
Mhm.
I mean, this was a very deep attachment that you had to somebody in the host country. I'm so delighted when to hear about these long-term relationships because when we go abroad, I don't know about you, but I didn't think, "Oh yeah, the people I'm gonna meet right now in China, I'm gonna still talk to them 15 years." I didn't think about that, but it is true, and especially with social
Yeah.
media, right? And for you, those deep connections, those deep relationship connections have
Mm.
been
Yeah,
commitment.
and I married a Peruvian. It was kinda sealed the deal,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
because in a lot of ways, those people were my family, and then when we married, they really became my family, and so, we I just was reflecting on this with him because we got back, 10 days ago from Peru, and so, um, the relationships we have there are as deep and connected and feel as rich and feel as much like home as the relationships we have here. So when people say, "Oh, you guys go
Mhm.
back to visit Christian's family," I say, "No, we go back to visit our family." So, um,
Mhm.
we stay in touch. We're on WhatsApp several times a day. I'm getting a message from one of our people there.
Do you wanna tell us anything else about what you loved about Peru? You're talking about these are your people, this is your
Sure.
family.
hmm
Anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think from the first time that I ever went to Peru, what stood out to me was I loved the people. I love the food. Melissa knows this. Peruvian food is
Mhm.
fantastic.
It is.
Um, there's so much about not just the individual people that I love, but of the culture and the way that they value people. And I just think there was a call on my life to be part of it.
Mhm.
I don't love the city of Lima, and yet it's home. And I
Mhm.
and I don't ever really want to live there, and yet I'm homesick for it all the time. So
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I
yeah.
mean, would yes,
Yeah.
um, because your people are there
Mhm.
and your memories are there. Such special memories are there, and
Yeah,
it's
Lima, it would not be an easy place to live at all. And yet, like you said, you long for it when you're not there because you're attached to it still.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
it's one of the homes that you we
Yeah,
get homesick for.
absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, what surprised you about living in Peru or your community or
Um,
Falling in love with Christian.
yeah, okay, that's a really good one. Okay, I did not go expecting to find a husband. And our friendship, developed into we started dating, about 6 months after I got there, and we dated for 3 years before he proposed, and so that absolutely surprised me. I didn't expect to arrive and become a single mom, and I didn't expect to go home from Peru with a husband. And right alongside gaining that relationship with Christian was this whole deep community. I think I knew I had a sense that I had work to do there. I didn't know how deeply my roots would go and what I would gain in terms of
Mm.
relationships.
Mhm.
I like that analogy. You didn't realize how deep your roots would go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
I'm just
hmm
I just wanna take a moment to just savor that, like, the reality
Hmm.
of, yeah, what God had in store for you. It was beyond.
So much better than what I could have.
I think of the verse about how, beyond all that we could ever ask or imagine,
Yeah.
and yeah, for sure.
And I think the interesting thing is, I remember reflecting on this with a friend a year or two into living there. I'd come back and I said, I have experienced so much loss and sadness and grief in the time I've been in Lima. And yet I've also experienced so much joy and depth and belonging and relationships. But because we were doing ministry um, with a population of kids that often don't live as long, students with disabilities, and when we had started work in the orphanage, these were kids with the most profound disabilities in the country who were in an orphanage that had round the clock doctor and nurse care because their
Wow.
parents couldn't care for them at home, even if they wanted to, even if parents were involved in their life. There were children who were there because they didn't have electricity or, and the kid needed a ventilator or whatever it was. So I remember going to my first velorio, like my first wake, where someone's body is laid out on the dining room table for everybody to come and mourn together. And I thought, this is so raw. It's just so raw.
Yeah.
It's so real. It's not fixed up and pretty and sterilized, or
Mhm.
standing at gravesides of a kid who had passed away in the orphanage where there was no one else to go to their grave.
Mm.
And so our team
Mhm.
stood at their grave. So I think of just the rawness of life there. Um,
Mhm.
and I think the depth of that matches the depth of the beauty.
Mhm. Yeah, when we protect ourselves from the pain and the reality of suffering, we also unintentionally end up protecting ourselves from the deepest
Mhm.
connections and
Absolutely.
joy and beauty, just like what you're saying.
You know how people say when we talk about, like, the metaphor of light and dark, and, if you don't experience one deeply, then you
Mhm.
don't experience the other deeply, it's like your
100%.
depth
Mhm.
of pain probably helped you
Mhm.
experience or helps all of us experience the depth of beauty even more.
Mhm.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
I just think in developing countries, they have less layers to hide behind. There's something I remember
Mhm.
thinking, I've been to some funerals, but somebody has cleaned up the body and made them up, and it's this very clean space and this very clean casket, and there's like these layers between my loss and the reality.
Yeah.
Whereas when my friend is fixing up her sister's body on the kitchen table, like, all the layers are gone.
It's not a stranger in a mortuary doing it for you.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we in our culture here, we are so have removed ourselves from so many of
Mhm.
those things, and I don't know that we even have any clue what we've lost because of that.
Yeah, and I think I mean, that I think of that in terms of death, but I think it was true in terms of life too.
Yeah.
When somebody has an urgent need financially in the States, or somebody loses their job, they go to get unemployment, or they go to get, food stamps, or, whatever crisis there is. My car is in a wreck, then I go to get a rental car. So we have these layers and
And
solutions, and when you
insurance and
remove Yes, exactly. When you remove all that, there's a rawness that causes your need is more obvious, and you depend on your community in a different way to meet those
mhm,
needs. And so I
mhm,
think all of life, the woman who's selling you your groceries won't eat tonight if she doesn't sell enough groceries, and neither were her kids. And the food that I just bought from the market, the chicken was slaughtered this morning. If I'd gone early enough, I could have watched it happen. And the fruit was
mhm.
picked last week. And so there's less space between us and these realities of life.
I guess maybe we've just been kind of talking about some of what you learned and experienced about life and the world as a
Mhm.
result of living there. What would you want to say maybe as our closing question for this first part of your interview? What did you learn about yourself as a result of that time living in Peru?
I think in a lot of ways, it was empowering to realize I can move to another country and set up a life. And, for a year I parented, but then I moved into my own apartment and lived on my own and figured out how to get around a city of 10 million. And, um, I bought a car and I drove. I said I'd never live in Lima. I said I'd never drive in Lima. I said I'd never marry a Peruvian. So I think a lot of that, I don't know that I thought that at the time, but I look back and I go, "Oh my gosh, I was 28 and I moved, adjusted, set down roots, built a team. We started doing really incredible work." So I think a lot of it was learning that I could, because it's it's a big difference from moving a few hours away from home and having roommates in college. Um, I also think I learned that I could attach deeply to other people, and And that relationships and community were something I could build probably anywhere if I could do it there. And yeah, I think I learned so much about assumptions I made, the worldview I held. I think when I think about what did I learn about the world, it's just as much about me to realize that I have a very tiny, small perspective of the bigger world out there, the challenges, joys, difficulties, and realities. And so I think it shifted maybe in a lot of ways when I stand in front of the ocean and I see how big it is and powerful it is and how small I am. I think in a lot of ways, living in another country brings an awareness of my own smallness and an appreciation for other people and other perspectives. Oh, and I think I learned how privileged I was. I thought we grew up in a humble family where my parents had one car when I was younger and lived in a humble home. And I have learned over and over, continue to be humbled at the incredible privilege I hold to have a U.S. passport and access to the world because of it, an education that was free, and everything in between. So my own sense of privilege has humbled me deeply and causes me to say, how then should I live?
Thank you, Christen, for sharing your round-trip stories from Peru. You were all in as you moved to Peru to go and learn and watch. And having a foster baby right away made the learning and grounding happen even faster. Throughout your years of coming alongside young life leaders and families to serve their students with intellectual disabilities, you experienced deep grief and deep joy. One of the joys was meeting your future husband and discovering how deep your roots would really go in Peru. So what happened when Christen returned to the United States? You'll have to make a return trip to our podcast for part 2 of Christen's round-trip story to find out.
Want the podcast equivalent of early boarding and first-class seating? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you consider sharing it with your fellow globe-trotting friends? We would love to encourage them too. We believe that sharing stories helps our understanding of the world grow larger while the distance between us grows smaller.
As this episode lands, we hope these stories have encouraged you, helped you find some more of your belongings, and made your baggage a little lighter. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.